In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Beneficent. The title of this lecture seems absurd. After all, 2 plus 2 equals 4 for Christians, atheists, Muslims, Hindus, and all religions. So the point of this lecture is to explain why it is necessary to take an Islamic approach to statistics, even though this seems impossible or absurd at the beginning. Our larger goal is the idea of secular knowledge itself. The idea that there is a kind of knowledge which is objective, universally acceptable to all, based on reasons and observation. Everyone can agree to this kind of knowledge, and this is independent of any morality. One of the main contentions of the Ghazali project is that all knowledge which is important for our lives must be built on moral foundations. So you can't have the kind of objective knowledge that secular knowledge claims to be. And so we want to show that large portions of Western knowledge which claim to be secular are in fact built on hidden moral foundations, and statistics is an example of this phenomena. To understand the relevance and importance of Islam, we must begin with a puzzle from human history. 14 centuries ago, the message of the Quran transformed the ignorant and backwards Bedouin into world leaders, and it created a civilization which lasted for more than 1,000 years. And the Quran starts with the command to read and mentions that Allah Ta'ala will provide knowledge to mankind which they did not have before. So the questions that arise from this history is that what was this knowledge and how did it transform the Muslims? And does this knowledge have the same power today? Because Muslims again are ignorant and backwards. Can this knowledge transform their lives again and make them into world leaders? This is a complex question with many dimensions, but one element of the answer is that Islam creates the thirst for knowledge. The Quran mentions the value of knowledge many times, and same is true of the ahadith, the sayings of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Islamic civilization, acting upon this command, gathered knowledge from all civilizations across the globe, because the hadith mentions that knowledge is the lost property of the moment. So this was one of the key elements in the rise of the Islamic civilization, the enormous amount of knowledge that was gathered by Muslims. So the puzzle can be asked as follows, that when and how did the Muslims lose this thirst for knowledge, and why are Muslims backwards in ignorance today when our revelation starts with the command to read? Muslims are illiterate in large numbers today. How can this be? What happened? One of the important distinctions that has been lost by the Muslims is that Islam distinguishes between useful knowledge and useless knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ made dua to acquire useful knowledge, and he made dua to be protected from useless knowledge. But today, Muslims are unaware of this distinction. How do we know whether statistics is a useful knowledge or is it a harmful or useless knowledge? We don't know, but we have accepted the idea of secular knowledge. Some parts of knowledge are independent of religion and other parts are part of religion. This secular knowledge concept does not exist in Islam, but we know and accept this idea, and the idea of useful and useless knowledge is one very important to Islam, but we are unaware of it. So what is useful knowledge? Useful knowledge teaches us how to make the best use of our precious lives, and harmful or useless knowledge prevents us from doing so, or actually teaches us the wrong ways in which to use our lives. And the source of the problem is that Islam is focused on the goal of achieving success in the akhirah, of acquiring ma'arifat, of learning to know and love Allah, our creator. West rejected religion, their own religion, and therefore their goals became to acquire pleasure and power and profits. And so the knowledge they developed is useful for in the context of these goals. But the knowledge required to achieve success in the akhirah is very different from the knowledge required to achieve success in this dunya. Today, because we have all been educated by a Western model, we have accepted these ideas that this world is about pleasure and power and profits. And so this poison, this moral poison, has entered into our hearts. So to clean it from our hearts, we have to look at the genesis of these ideas. How did these ideas become common and popular in the West? And how did they come to dominate the world and to enter our hearts? So to understand this, we have to look at the history of how these ideas became popular in the West. Because also in the West, in the 16th century, there was convergence. The Bible teaches that the love of wealth is the root of all evil. But in the 18th century, it became popular to pursue wealth. Like Bernard Shaw says, that lack of wealth is the root of all evil. So this is an opposite idea from the Bible. So how did this transformation, this great transformation in European thought take place? And how did the West change the goals from success in the akhirah and the seeking of God to success in this dunya and the seeking of wealth as the goal of life? The story of intellectual developments in Europe is long and complicated, so we will just provide the briefest outline for our purposes. Basically, in the Dark Ages, the European tribes were a collection of barbarians. They were always fighting each other. The Islamic civilization was vastly more advanced and living in wealth and luxury. And the Crusades were the European attempts to steal this wealth and knowledge from the Muslims. They are presented as religious wars, but they were not. After about 7 centuries of advance in Spain, Islamic civilization in that part of the world became very decayed and degenerate, and this allowed the Europeans to reconquer Spain. And with this reconquest, they acquired a lot of wealth and a lot of knowledge. The greatest wealth they acquired was the millions of books in the libraries of the Muslims in Al-Andalus, and they started translating these knowledge into Latin and other European languages. And this is what ended the Dark Ages of Europe and created the Renaissance or the rebirth of Europe. This new knowledge flowing into Europe was the source of a major battle between the Catholic Church, which was trying to suppress this knowledge, which was very much in conflict with the doctrines of the Catholic Church. However, it could not do this successfully, and this knowledge did come in, but there was an effect in that the knowledge was made secret, and the people who were trying to import this knowledge from Muslims had to conceal their sources. One of the most famous examples of this concealment is the story of Copernicus, who actually just translated a manuscript of Ibn Shatir, but became known as a revolutionary. Similarly, the story of Descartes, who is the father of European philosophy, he got access to the works of Imam al-Ghazali through a secret society which was translating these works of Muslims and not telling people about the source of this knowledge. And ultimately, the creation of this factions in Christianity, the Protestants and Christians, led to bloody wars between the two Christian factions. More than a century of really destructive wars between Protestants and Catholics in Europe led to a general disenchantment with religion. And because Christianity failed to provide a code of conduct which was good for the people, the European intellectuals rejected Christianity as a code of conduct for life. The failure of Christianity to provide a code of conduct which could lead to a peaceful society and a peaceful world created a great crisis in European thought. But now religion has failed, so they had to redevelop a type of knowledge which tell them how to behave in communities and in nations and between two nations without the benefit of religion. And this is actually what led to the emergence of secular modernity. European intellectuals had to devise codes of conduct and how to govern a society and how to have relationships between nations without the benefit of religion. And they had to develop a system of knowledge which would tell them about this code of conduct, which would be universally acceptable to all. And basically, secular modernity is the result of this effort to replace Christianity. This led to a change in meaning which is very significant and a source of a great confusion between when Muslims try to read works in English language, because in English language religion has a very narrow meaning. The Christianity originally was both a code of conduct, a way of life which we call deen, and also a religion, a system of beliefs about God and creation of the universe and judgment and souls, etc. So in Europe, they rejected Christianity as deen, as way of life, as code of conduct, and they said, okay, this is just a personal belief system. So now when they talk about religion, it is about your personal beliefs. It doesn't have to do with your code of conduct. And unfortunately today, we think of religion as both a code of conduct and a personal belief. So we are confused when they say that secular modernity is not a religion. In fact, secular modernity is a religion, but it is the deen part, the public code of conduct, which is the religion, which is the religion of secular modernity. But because secular modernity poses as an objective and universal knowledge and not a deen which you have to believe in, that's why there is a huge amount of confusion among Muslims about this. But the project of creating a code of conduct on the basis of reason alone led to a problem which cannot be solved. Because if we want to explain how we should behave and how we should behave towards our family, how should we behave towards people who are poor or people who are rich or people who are powerful or people who are weak, then this requires some moral foundations, some moral concepts. You can't make these decisions. You can't tell people how to behave. You can't develop a code of conduct for society without moral foundations. But in the West, they did not have moral foundations because they had rejected Christianity. So this led to a problem, a paradox, a dilemma which cannot be solved. This forced European intellectuals to create an illusion. And they argued that yes, reason can find us a way because they had no options. They did not have a moral framework which had consensus among the conflicting parties. So they were forced to say that we will find a body of knowledge based on reason alone, which is objective, equally acceptable to all. But unfortunately, the reason does not have that much power. Reason cannot develop moral rules, and this was actually recognized by their philosophers like David Hume early, that when you have a moral principle like you should not kill or that you should help the poor, this is not something that you can that logic can tell you, and that this is not something which can be developed from observations and logic. So when Western intellectuals talked about reason, they used reason to derive morality, like the famous Kant has a whole theory of how morality comes from reason alone. This is all an illusion, a deception. Reason is unable to deliver rules of logic, but the Europeans had no choice but to do so, and in the process they basically concealed moral principles and very bad moral principles into the foundations of their thought. One of the key things which happened, which is very important to understand European reasoning, is that freedom and wealth became important. Freedom and wealth are both intermediate goods. They are not final. It's not important to have freedom for its own sake. It's important to have freedom because it gives you freedom to do what you want to do. Similarly, wealth is not important for its own sake. You can't eat money, but wealth gives you the opportunity to do what you want to do. However, in a secular society, there is no agreement on goals. Some people want to do something, others people want to do other things. And so in a traditional society, the idea is that we are all jointly cooperating to achieve common goals. But since there are no common goals in a secular society, these intermediate goods, freedom and wealth, become prized, because you can say, okay, let's give freedom to all and everybody can pursue their own goal. Let's give wealth to all and they can use this wealth to do whatever they like to do. So this transition occurred because there was no agreement on goals. Also, the Europeans were forced to restrict the scope of reason, because they did not want people to use reason to deduce the existence of God. It is a very easy deduction to say that we look at the order and the beauty and the precision of the universe around us and we conclude that somebody made it. There was a creator of this universe. But the Europeans said that no, this is not reason. They redefined reason to be such a restricted methodology that it cannot accept this argument, because this is a jump from what we see to an explanation of what we see. And this is not part of European reason. Actually, science was created by Ibn-ul-Haytham, who developed the methodology of science and explained what it was all about and utilized it for the study of optics. And he is actually the founder and father of optics, even though this fact is not acknowledged in the West. And the key methodology of science is to jump to an explanation, to look at the world, the mysteries of the world around us, and to think of an explanation of why this mystery occurs. But this leap is intuitive and it doesn't lead to certain conclusion. And this is why the Europeans have denied this methodology called abduction, and they only use deduction, which is a certain process from reasoning from axioms to consequences. But deduction has the failing that it can never generate new knowledge. What you have in the axioms is represented in a different format in the conclusions. So reason can never lead to knowledge, and only abduction, which involves guessing at explanations, can lead to knowledge. But this abduction is denied as being a valid form of reasoning in Western tradition, because once we start doing this abduction, then we can reach to the conclusion that God exists and He created the universe. Since the battle between Catholic religion and the influx of knowledge occurred, the battle of science and religion as it is called, it became the goal of European philosophers and intellectuals to prove that science was valid and that religion was superstition. And this goal was finally achieved in early 20th century by Western philosophers in the emergence of a philosophy called logical positivism. And basically, logical positivism said that science is based on observables and it is true and valid knowledge, and religion is based on unobservables like God and Akhira and life after death and souls, and this is all nonsense and garbage. And social sciences, we think that social sciences go back a long ways, but actually modern social sciences were invented and created in the early 20th century on the basis of the foundations provided by logical positivism. Now this philosophy failed. It had a spectacular crash in the 60s and 70s because it was realized that even science cannot get by without appealing to unobservables like electrons and gravity and subatomic particles, which nobody has ever seen, but you are forced to assume that they exist in order to explain what you can see. So logical positivism was rejected, but social science foundations continue to be based on positivist principles. And that is the main defect in the Western structure of knowledge, that even though the foundations were built on a wrong philosophy, the discipline has not been changed. it has not been realized that, okay, this foundation is wrong, so let's reject it. Let's build on a new foundation which is not positivist. And this is what needs to be done throughout all of the areas of Western knowledge. So first of all, let us say that we can understand logical positivism very, very succinctly and briefly by saying that it tells us to reject the unobservables. Notice how this contrasts with the Quran, which starts with Alif Lam Mim Zalikal Kitabul La Rayba Fih Hudal lil Muttaqin Allazina Yu'minuna Bil Ghaib. So the first characteristics of those with taqwa and those who will receive guidance is that they believe in the unseen. And logical positivism is based on a systematic rejection of the unseen. It says that if you can't see it, then it's not part of knowledge. And so basically it says that knowledge comes only from observations and reason. But the main defect is that observations and reason cannot lead to certain knowledge. Both of them are defective. Reason can make mistakes and observations can also be mistaken. In addition, logical positivist methodology makes assumptions about hidden structures of reality. These are not articulated and these remain concealed. And everything is built on these hidden foundations. So the body of knowledge called social sciences is built on moral foundations, but these foundations are concealed because positivism says that you can't have moral foundations. So basically one has to work at digging up the hidden moral foundations, and when you do that and you examine the hidden moral foundations, you find that these are toxic and poisonous. And basically social science is based on the idea that we live in a jungle of fierce competition and we have to the only social rule is survival of the fittest. And so this is very harmful because it teaches us to compete with each other, to kill each other, to achieve power and wealth and so on, and pursue worldly goals, and that this is the only source of morality. So coming to the subject at hand, we need to think about how logical positivism shaped the development of modern statistics. And basically there are three key ideas. One is that the unobservables cannot enter into science, and so we can only talk about things which we can observe, and anything we can observe we can measure in some way or the other. And so this leads to the idea that numbers are the deepest form of knowledge. And so basically modern statistics is built on these ideas, and these are all wrong ideas, and these prevent the development of a sound body of knowledge which can be called statistics. So if we reject these positivist ideas, then basically we have to start from scratch to define what statistics is all about if it is not about numbers. So basically we start with the idea that the reality is always hidden, and contrary to the positivist ideas that the hidden reality, the unobservable, does not matter, we say that this hidden reality is of central importance. That is the main thing. So the thing which is supposed to be not matter is actually the only thing which matters. And so what about the numbers? The numbers can never capture the secret or the hidden reality, but they can provide some clues, some indications. So basically the goal in real statistics is to use numbers to learn about the hidden reality. And one of these pieces of hidden reality which is most important for statistics is causality. Causality can never be observed in numbers, so you can never use numbers to learn about causality. And this is one of the keys. In numbers you can only use to calculate correlations, and correlations are never enough to tell you about causality. So how do you get causality? You get causality by learning stories about what is happening in the real world and how this generates numbers. And ultimately this means that statistics, because we can never make certain conclusions about hidden realities, we can only make tentative arguments. This means that statistics is not a conclusive, final kind of objective answer that the statistics tell me that X is good and Y is bad. It will never be certain. You can only say that, okay, in my view, if this view about hidden reality is right, then this such and such should be the case. So basically, statistics will be a branch of rhetoric, the art of persuasion, how to use numbers to argue. It will not have the certainty that current statistics pretends to have, but actually does not. So one of the key contentions of real statistics is that we must look beyond the numbers. The answers are never in the numbers themselves. You have to go to these numbers are measuring. There is a reality which is being measured by numbers, and the answers and the questions are all about this hidden reality and never about the numbers. And so the meaning of the numbers is never on the surface. You cannot analyze numbers to discover their meaning. You have to go beyond the numbers. We must always interpret and understand numbers in the real world context in which they emerge. And when we talk about real world context, there will always be some stories we tell about the real world which are not certain, and the numbers never represent the full information that we have about the numbers. So this idea that numbers cannot lie is the biggest lie. Numbers are always telling us falsehoods because they present only one aspect of the story and fail to present many other dimensions. So for example, if I say that student X scored 99 points and student Y scored only 80 points, so student X is better. This is one aspect. This measures the performance on the test, but it doesn't measure their motivation, their enthusiasm, how much effort they put in. So it's actually one truth that one student scored higher on one test, but it conceals a lot of hidden structures of reality which are very important. Another crucial difference between real statistics, radical approach, and conventional statistics is that we reject the divide between theory and practice. Now, conventional statistics texts say that, okay, there is a class of methods which we call statistical theory, and you learn these methods and you can apply them to any numbers regardless of where they come from. And you don't have to worry about the practice of statistics, because the numbers contain information and statistics reveals this information. Who will use this information, why they are looking for this information, what they will do with it. These are not questions which are of the concern of the statistician. We reject this idea and we say that we must start with the problem in the real world which we are trying to solve, and we must look at what the solution, what the numbers suggest. The numbers cannot give us the solution because the numbers don't have all the information. And so we use the numbers as a partial method to analyze a real world problem. So even simple techniques like mean, median, mode, which one should we use depends on what the real world problem is. It cannot be solved. You cannot say that, okay, I should use mean or median or mode without knowing what the numbers are, what the real world problem is, and what we are going to do with these numbers. So Islamic approach leads to holistic thinking. You have to start with the problem. So suppose that a man comes to a statistical consultant. He says, I have gathered number on the incomes of the people, and so just tell me what the mean of these numbers is. What is the average? So the statistician looks at the numbers and he says that there are 100 people in the random sample. One of them is a billionaire and all the others have zero income. Suppose there are 1,000 people. Then he can say that, okay, the average of these 1,000 numbers is 1 million. So you can say that the average income of all of these 1,000 people is $1 million. Now this is completely wrong because one person is a billionaire and everybody else has zero. And so million is not representative. But if you just say that, okay, this is the technique, if the statistician does not know where the numbers come from, he's just given a list of 1,000 numbers, one of them is a billion, and he's asked to compute the average, he will do so. He will say that this is million. But if he asks, why did you gather these numbers? So he finds out that this person is trying to show that there is prosperity in a certain place. And he is going to use this average to argue that, look, people have on the average $1 million, so everybody is well off, so you don't need to provide support for them. Then this is completely wrong and misleading. So we need to know So if the statistician knows this, then he will say that, look, the mean is very misleading and we should here use the median. The median will be 0 because there are 500 numbers above 0 and 500 below 0, roughly speaking. So the median will be represented. It will show, it will give a better picture of what the average person has in this area, not the mean, which will be 1 million, but the median. So, and also the mode will provide a much better picture of what is going on. The mode will be 0. So what I'm saying is that the technique that the statistician uses depends on what the problem is, how it is being solved, and what is the goal in presenting a solution. If the goal is to pacify the people, then you should use the mean. But if the goal is to present a true picture of reality, then you should use the mode or the median. So the statistician cannot be a theoretician alone. He has to ask who has brought me the numbers, why have they brought me these numbers, what are they going to do with my analysis once I give them an analysis. So it can't be separated. So in this lecture we have presented a very sketchy outline of very deep and difficult subjects. This has taken me about 20 years to develop, and some of these dimensions I will discuss in a later lecture, and more details about some of the ideas discussed are available from the links provided. Here, this is only a part of a motivation for this new course in statistics we are developing. It's called Real Statistics, and a radical approach. And this approach is based on Islamic epistemology and Islamic pedagogy. And this course illustrates the idea that Western structures of knowledge are built on hidden assumptions, which are often wrong. And so once we look at the foundations of this knowledge, we'll realize that the foundations are wrong. So we need to throw them out and rebuild the whole structure of knowledge on new foundations. So the Ghazali project is about reconstructing the entire structure of knowledge that has been developed by the West over the past 3 centuries. Today, the central problem is that this structure is based on toxic moral foundations, and it also creates a Eurocentric worldview which teaches everyone who studies Western education will end up believing that the West is the most advanced civilization known to mankind, and they have the best kind of knowledge, and Western knowledge is the solution to all problems, even though all of these things are wrong. And the Quran offers us a much superior knowledge. But in order to prove this, we need to develop alternatives to Western education, because we cannot do without Western education. Western education develops very essential skills for use in modern world, and so we need those skills, but we need to acquire those skills without going through Western education. So this course in statistics is a kind of an example, a model of how we can do this, how we can get the skills that we need, but without using the Western moral foundations and the Western epistemology and the Western pedagogy, all of which is very, very much in conflict with Islamic epistemology and Islamic methodology and Islamic pedagogical principles. So this course is actually a proof of concept of this idea of how we need to change Western education and replace Western courses by alternative courses built on Islamic moral foundations. May Allah Ta'ala guide us in our search for truth. Allahumma arina haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittaba'ahu wa arina batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabahu.